forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings, welcome to a brand new episode of Bigger Ten. I'm Steve Deace alongside my co-host, who is my absolutely never partner. The one and only, Aaron McIntyre is just wearing me.
Wearing you.
Wearing my
You
name.
think I'm Buffalo Bill or something like that?
Wearing, yeah, that got dark really quick. Gosh. Hello, Clarice. Anyway, good to see you again, brother. It's been a couple of weeks. Actually, no, we just did this show last week. So how are you?
Yeah. I'm sure for you with your day-to-day job, it's felt like a couple of weeks last week.
It's been nuts, man. But you know what? It's March. It's March, and that means two things. Three things. Cadbury mini eggs are back. Shamrock shakes have arrived. March Madness is just around the corner. Excited. We've got the tournament coming to Des Moines again this year, and decided to splurge a little bit to get the son and I really good seats at center court for one of the sessions to go.
Nice.
Because we've gone every year that it has been here so far. I've taken him every time, and we've had a blast every time. And so every year at this time, Aaron, it's kind of a tradition for me that goes back to before you were even my co-host and never partner on this show, that I'm a longtime believer that the bracketologist, and there's so many of these guys now, there's like friggin' 60 of them if you go to Bracket Matrix, all right? This is the most overrated sports science there is, right? And I'm sure guys like, and I used to have Jerry Palma, my old sports show, was a nice guy. I'm sure guys like him and Joe Leonard are nice dudes. But really, how hard is it to correctly pick the NCAA tournament field when you're picking the bracket all the way up until every one of the postseason games is already played?
Now, of course, we have the net rankings,
right?
too.
You have the net rankings. You have all the postseason tournaments are played. I mean, if I was turning in a bracket 10 minutes before the bracket actually came out, if I don't get 95%, I suck too, right? No, to me, the real test, championship week, begins this weekend, right? So to me, the real test has always been, what can you do 2 weeks out from Selection Sunday before any of the automatic bids are factored? And so we do this exercise every single year. I will tell you, this is the easiest time I have ever had picking the field. The bubble is just anemically weak. I mean, anemically weak. There aren't a lot of at-large candidates really out there right now. This is the easiest time I've had. I think the vast majority, when I got done, and how I always do it, before I rank the teams 1 to 64 and start my S-curve, is who do I know right now, if they didn't win another game these last 2 weeks, would get an at-large bid. And I think, Aaron, I came down to 31 out of the 36 at-large bids were already spoken for.
Yikes.
So there wasn't even, forget how anemic the resumes are on the bubble, there wasn't even much of a bubble. What are your overall thoughts?
So I have a question for you. This popped into my head not too long ago. Do you think the selection committee, now you know we used to do RPI.
Right.
I know that was kind of one of their official or unofficial rubrics.
And that was a schedule measuring metric.
Yeah. Do you think they have always had the net rankings and they just decided to publish them a few years ago?
Some form of advanced analytics?
I think they did, because every year that we've had them so far, it seems like it's shaking out it's just more transparent. I appreciate that. It seems like it's kind of shaking out the same way it always has.
That's an interesting question. I mean, the RPI goes back, I think, to 1993. I doubt they had those analytics back then, but Ken Palm goes back to 2002. We just debuted the net rankings, in 2017?
Yeah.
So do we believe that they went 15 years without any advanced analytics at all? It's actually, given that we're talking about the NCAA, this is the one major championship that they actually run. They don't run the college football playoff at all. So Would you be shocked to learn that it took them that long to update their metric? No. But I also don't think it's crazy to think that maybe they had this 3, 4, 5 years or something along those lines. Or maybe we're using things like Bart Torvik and Ken Palm and wanted to come up with their own proprietary metric that measured maybe a few of the things more that they're into than just pure efficiency, right? That's a fascinating question. So with last year, with 2 weeks out on this episode last year, I got 78% of the teams correct. But more importantly, Aaron, I only missed 2 of the at-large bids. So almost all the teams that I missed last year were, teams that were upset in their conference tournament. I mean, I take that every single year. The year before, by the way, I got 75%. So what is more impressive, getting 98, 99% when you already know one half of the field, or getting 78% when you don't know officially any of the field? What's more impressive, do you think?
Well, I know you're tilting the jury here just a little bit,
just
but
a little.
Is
Prejudicing it at least a little bit. Yes.
Yeah, no, it's the conference tournaments. Those aren't just preludes of March Madness. To me, that is in as much or as much of March Madness, a part of March Madness, as the actual national tournament is.
I agree.
Because crazy things happen. I think it was Richmond actually had the lowest percentage chance per, I think it was Ken Palm last year, of winning their conference tournament. They went on and they made it to the round of 32. And I think they bowed out right after upsetting my Hawkeyes. But things like that happen, which makes it very, very difficult to predict ahead of time where things will shake out.
So without further ado, are we ready to unveil my projected field?
You bet.
All right, let's get it started. Let's start in the East region. I believe this regional will take place in New York City. The number 1 seed I have is the Houston Cougars. They would play 16th seeded Merrimack. The 8-9 game, and man, there are a lot of compelling matchups, even in the first round, because of how how much parity there is this season. Northwestern versus Arkansas. Talk about a contrast of styles right there. Those games would be in Birmingham, and that pod, the Albany pod, Xavier as a 4 seed out of the Big East against Fordham, which I am projecting as a bid stealer, winning its conference tournament. 5 TC. I typically will project, usually on average, Aaron, there are about 3 bid stealers every year in conference tournaments when you do the long-term math. So I always project 3. It's just a matter of, do I get the right 3 or not? Okay. So Fordham is one of those 3. The 5-12 matchup, TCU versus Colgate. Of course, those have traditionally been havens for upsets. In Greensboro, I've got UConn playing the winner of one of the first-round games between Arizona State and Mississippi State. So that tells you those are 2 of my last 4 teams in. I have Tennessee as the 3 seed against Rick Pitino and Iona. So Rick Barnes against Rick Pitino, that would be a fascinating coaching matchup. Those 2, of course, used to work together. And in Columbus, I've got Indiana, the number 2 seed there, projecting them to win the Big Ten tournament. Although I got to tell you, after the way they looked the other night against Iowa, I don't know how I feel about that. Against UNC Asheville, the 15 seed. And in Columbus, I have Duke versus Liberty in the 7-10 matchup, setting up, that would be quite a second-round matchup. Duke, Indiana. Really, all those second-round matchups would be interesting. Houston and Arkansas would be interesting. Xavier and TCU, UConn, Tennessee. So that is my bracket in the East Regional. Your thoughts?
Upsets immediately jumping off, not the 12-5 in this one. TCU, I think, is pretty solid. But Colgate has given teams in the NCAA tournament. I mean, it's a good basketball program. They've given people issues before. I actually think the 6-11 UConn, Arizona State / Mississippi State, biggest chance of an upset, even though you have both of those teams last 4 in. And then the other one, I think if you want to go a long stretch, I'm not huge on Indiana. Maybe this is recency bias. They have some great moments. Heck, they swept Purdue pretty easily.
Haven't done that in a decade, by the way.
They swept Purdue, but then they go, I think it was senior night even, last night as we're taping this on Wednesday the 1st. They go and just completely lay an egg at home against Iowa. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in that. I think a good game, obviously, it's always going to be the 8-9 game. They're Northwestern and Arkansas. and no real thoughts on Xavier Fordham. But I think the 6-11 matchup probably your best opportunity at one of those memorable early tournament upsets.
All right, let's move on to the next bracket in my projected field. This is the South region. Let's start here in our backyard of Des Moines. The number 1 seed, the Kansas Jayhawks. I have them against the play-in winner of Cleveland State and Northwestern State, 2 of the lowest seeded auto bids. The 8-9 game, Auburn against Rutgers. That would be a complete contrast of styles there. Bruce Pearl against Steve Peichel. In Albany, the number 4 seed, Creighton, which got off to a very slow start, but has been one of the best teams in college basketball in the country in the second half of the year, against Toledo, which has clearly been the class of the MAC. But that's also a league that typically the chalk doesn't win its conference tournament. The 5 seed, I have San Diego State, which is basically just a perennial NCAA tournament team now, against Charleston, which is as a 12. Charleston will be a team the analytics love. That will be a mid-major team that a lot of the sharps are going to be on in this NCAA tournament, regardless of where their actual draw is. In Greensboro, the 6th seed, Iowa State against 11th seeded Florida Atlantic, which I am projecting will get an at-large bid despite not winning its conference tournament because of its net ranking. Virginia, the 3 seed against 14th seeded Furman. And then in Birmingham, the second half of that pod, Maryland as a 7 against Pitt, who might end up winning the ACC regular season championship, yet be a 10 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's nuts. And then Alabama, the number 2 seed here against 15th seeded Sam Houston State. So that's how I am projecting right now the South bracket.
So a lot of people are going to be all over this 6-11 as a potential upset watch. Iowa State limping into the postseason. I actually think we could see a repeat of what we saw last year with Iowa State. Get out of the Big 12. Get out of the Big 12.
Yes.
Teams aren't prepared for the level and the style of play that you bring to the table, especially on the defensive end, and you can just smother people. I think we could see a repeat of what they did last year. I just don't know where they'll be at mentally, limping in as they have. I actually think the 2-15 matchup there, I think that could be fairly interesting, although Alabama has so much firepower, I'm not really sure if Sam Houston can make it a game. Creighton Toledo, I could see that one being like 80-80, something like that.
Yeah.
San Diego State versus Charleston. You mentioned that as being a sharp matchup, the Sharps
Charleston.
being
all the Sharps will
over
be on Charleston.
Yeah. I can see that as well. And then Auburn Rutgers. Oh man, that could be an ugly UGLY. I mean, you ain't got no alibi. That could be an ugly game, and Rutgers definitely hopes it could be. But I would say be really careful about the 6-11 matchup there. If you're planning on betting this, I would say I wouldn't. If Iowa State's favored, I would not take the points there, but I would, at the very least, play the under. And if you get Iowa State at plus money at some point throughout the game, I would take them.
Let's go on to our next regional. This is in the Midwest. These games will be in Kansas City. In Columbus, number 1 seed Purdue against the winner of the other play-in game, Grambling and Norfolk State. This one of those will be the 16th seed. The 8-9 game is NC State versus USC in Orlando. Marquette, the number 4 seed, against 13th seeded Eastern Washington, which them and Montana State have just absolutely dominated the Big Sky this year. The 5th seed Kentucky against 12 seed Oral Roberts, who of course has a history in this tournament just a couple of years ago, and that's another team. I think they're going to win the Summit League by like 5 games. Charleston and Oral Roberts, if they both make win their conference tournaments, the Sharps, because of where they're at analytically, are going to be all over those teams. Oral Roberts is kind of the offensive version of what St. Peter's was defensively last year when Kentucky lost to them. Denver. You'll have 6-seeded Providence in my projection against the other play-in winner, Oklahoma State and Clemson. So you can see now my final 4 teams were Arizona State, Mississippi State, Oklahoma State, and Clemson. The 3-seed Texas against California, Santa Barbara. That'll make Jim Rome happy. And in Denver, the number 2 seed Arizona, maybe overall when they're on, the most complete team in the country against the 7-10 game, Miami and Iowa.
So I think looking at this just kind of offhand, Summit League it's the Summit League guys, so it's not like we're talking about NBA G League here, but it was not great this season, with the exception of Oral Roberts. So, as you mentioned, that's the one that jumps off the page to me. I don't know what Kentucky really brings to the table this year that would really excite a person about their prospects outside of the first round or second round. I think the Providence Oklahoma State / Clemson game, that could be a very, very exciting game. Clemson does kind of like to do ground and pound a little bit, but that could be a very competitive matchup there. Texas, UC Santa Barbara, I could see that. Just seems like it's one of the California system schools.
That sounds like a game you tune in at 10 o'clock and there's an upset, right?
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
It does.
And then Miami versus Iowa. If Creighton Toledo comes to pass, and that's like 80-80, I could see 90-90. Iowa versus Miami there, but I don't know. As an Iowa fan, I don't think they'll be a 10 seed now, which you did this before. You did this,
Yeah, I did this before
week.
They went to Indiana and got one of the most impressive road wins in the Big Ten.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'll watch the game. I'll have no. Wouldn't this is the year? Mediocre Iowa, some some high-ish highs, some low lows, like really lows. Biggest point spread upset in I think basketball history or something like that. Wouldn't this be the year that they make it to the Sweet 16? Of course.
First time this century.
First time this century, yeah.
On the other hand, if you're an Iowa fan, you'd rather be a 10 seed than an 8 or a 9. Do you want to really move up a seed line?
Nope.
Yeah. All right, final region. Let's go to the West. Sacramento, I have the number 1 seed here, UCLA, which I think won the Pac-12 by 3 games. Or at least they're up 3 games right now. Princeton, the 16 seed, they're hosting the Ivy League tournament, so I am projecting them to be that league's representative. There's a history here. Back in the day when UCLA was the defending national champions, they lost to Pete Carrill and Princeton in the first round. 8-9 matchup, Michigan State and Missouri. 2 teams that you would think have played a lot. I'm not sure they've ever played ever. In Orlando, 4th-seeded Kansas State against 13th-seeded Marshall, which I am projecting as a bid stealer. And then Florida Atlantic, aforementioned, gets in at large. In the 5-12 matchup, man, this would be a hell of a game.
Yep.
St. Mary's against Drake. I'm projecting Drake as the 2 seed to win the Missouri Valley Conference tournament. Also in Sacramento, 6th-seeded Texas A&M against 11th-seeded West Virginia. 3rd-seeded Gonzaga against 14th-seeded North Texas. And the final pod here in Des Moines, the 2-seed Baylor against 15th-seeded Vermont. The 7th-seed Illinois versus 10th-seeded Nevada.
The 10-7 game there that you just mentioned, that could be a good one. I think Illinois, I don't trust them.
Nevada coached by Steve Alford.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't... say what you want about Steve Alford. He has shown at times, the ability to be a decent coach. I think that could be a sneaky matchup. Texas A&M, West Virginia. It seems like teams. It's Bob Huggins, guys. You know what he's going to bring to the table. They're going to try to get in your face at all times. And people just continue to seem baffled by that, or teams continue to be baffled by this. How all these many years he's been coaching, so that could be an interesting matchup. But yeah, the one that stands out to me the most, St. Mary's versus Drake. That's a game that if St. Mary's is not at 100%, Drake actually might not even be a close game. Drake could win very handily, and we know this because Drake is here in our backyard in Des Moines. They've got a very good coach, and when they are on, they're on.
I think both those teams could be Sweet 16 teams.
Yep.
Yeah, if in this timeline where this were the field. All right, let's break down the actual numbers here. My last 4 teams that got byes out of the play-in round: USC, Missouri, Pittsburgh, West Virginia. My last 4 teams in, as I mentioned a few minutes ago: Oklahoma State, Mississippi State, Clemson. Arizona State was my very last team in the field. My last 4 teams out: Utah State, Michigan, Memphis. Preseason number 1 team, North Carolina. The last time we did not have the preseason number 1 team in the NCAA tournament, you've got to go back almost 50 years to when NC State was preseason number 1 as defending national champions and didn't make the NCAA tournament because back in those days, only 1 team per conference could get in. That's how long ago it's been since the preseason number 1 team didn't make it to the big dance. Break it down by league. You can see the Big 12, Big 10, SEC each get 8 teams in. The ACC 6, the Big East 5, the Pac-12 4.
So a note on North Carolina as well, and you mentioned this or made a note of this when we were not on the air. It's not like they've had a ton of injuries either. This is not a distinction that you want to have. Going back to the era you just mentioned, and you've got pretty much the same team that was in the national championship game last year.
Plus Larry Nance, Northwestern's best player for the last few years.
Yeah.
And now Northwestern's having its best season ever without him. So.
And this just encapsulates, to me anyway, I debated by myself, is this parody or is this a watered down year or kind of we're not really talking about greatness individually or team performance. How many times have we said that? It's like Zach Edey and I don't know who else.
Purdue is Wisconsin with Zach Edey.
Yeah. I don't know. We're not talking about great teams, not talking about great players or individual efforts. A lot of fits and starts everywhere. You look everywhere around the landscape of college basketball. To me, this is a very watered down year, which means this tournament is going to be off the chain.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely it will be. All right, we'll come back. Let's play our weekly game of Would You Rather next. All right, back here on Bigger 10. Time to play Would You Rather. Aaron, I'll start with you. Would you rather be on the receiving end of a Fran McCaffrey stare down or tantrum?
Okay, point of order here. I feel like I have to defend my Hawkeyes now because I've tapped out on them like 3 times, and the drug just keeps hooking me back in. I've tapped out on them like 3 times this season, and they keep hooking me back in. I mean, that Michigan State game, I was watching it in the basement, and I was like, whatever.
Hell, they hooked me in on that one.
I mean, I was watching in the basement. They were down by like 13, 14, 15, something like that in the second half. Like I took my son up to give him some lunch, and I decided not to turn it on the TV up there just because I knew what was happening. I put my son down for a nap, went to the gas station, got a text from a buddy, said this is another late season collapse. I figured that meant the game was over. I came back from getting gas, went downstairs, back down to the basement where the game was still on. There was like 10 seconds left, and they were down by 2 or something like that. How in the world did this happen? And then they turn around after that effort and go to Indiana and blow the doors off of a team that just came off the heels of sweeping Purdue. What is it about Fran McCaffrey that makes people clutch their pearls so? Now, I will admit, if he lost that game, fair game. You're fair game. But it's not like we're talking about Nate Oates here, who is like putting on a masterclass of tone deafness when it comes to what's his face, who was an accessory.
Brandon Miller.
Miller, accessory to murder. The stare down thing, yeah, it's weird. So I would rather have a tantrum than a stare down. What is it about this guy that provokes so many emotions from people? And if you just want to say he hasn't made it to the Sweet 16 like ever, kind of shut your hole and know your role. Tom Izzo, any number of coaches who have more pedigree postseason pedigree than Fran McCaffrey, we can let that slide. If you want to say that, I get that. But man alive, everybody is hard on the refs. Every single coach gets very, very angry. What is it about Fran McCaffrey that provokes this? Next one is for you.
Nice filibuster. I liked it.
Would you rather be in a more competitive pod close to home, talking about the NCAA tournament, or a less competitive pod 1,000 miles away?
Great question, and I learned this from John Beeline. All right, it's not about the seating or the location. It's about the matchup. And I go back to the year that Michigan and Michigan State were both vying to be the team that got placed in Auburn Hills, and Michigan State did, and we got shipped out west to L.A., but we were in a far weaker region. Didn't really play well in much of that regional. This was 2018 and still made it to the Final Four. Michigan State lost at home to Syracuse. I say at home. It was at the Palace, basically a home game. Lost in the second round at the Palace to Syracuse despite that home court advantage. So give me the weaker region, period, every single time. Yes. Great question.
All right.
For you, see, I'm an equal opportunity offender here. Would you rather be on the receiving end of a Juwan Howard snarl or tantrum?
snarl, less chance I get slapped in the face.
I thought you might say that. Less chance that something might. With Juwan, there is a legit fear of something physical happening. With Fran, with all due respect to Fran, that ref he did that stare down to has not skipped chest day. I don't think he was all that intimidated by Fran's stare. Juwan, though, he might reach back and change your weekend. You don't know. That precedent has been set. So there you go.
Let's see. Final one from me. Did you have Wisconsin in your field of 68?
I did not. No.
Okay. Let's pretend they make a run in the Big Ten tournament here, because they are somewhat on the bubble in some cases, right?
Yes.
Would you rather pick Wisconsin or Iowa to make it past the first weekend in the NCAA tournament?
I just, even by Wisconsin standards, anemically athletic. I mean, it just looks like a better coached version of a Todd Licklider team. It's so white.
Ouch.
It sears. It leaves an imprint on your projection screen. Okay, like a burn through. So I have to go with Iowa. They have some playmakers, like, and Iowa's white guys can make plays. Okay, so I've got to go. I have to go with Iowa.
Todd Licklider.
Despite the history of Iowa not getting out of the first weekend this century.
Yeah, in case you're wondering, what Steve is talking about, if you're watching this on YouTube, right after this video, do a YouTube search for Lil Lick.
Yeah.
John Licklider. That's his son.
There's white players.
And then there's John Licklider.
And then there's white players.
Yeah, there's John Licklider.
There's white players, and then Wisconsin right now is like a team full of rooster. Okay? I was getting so frustrated watching us not guard them last week. I'm like, is someone going to guard Rooster after this timeout, please? Okay. I mean, it's one thing if your white guys are Jimmy Chitwood, Steve Alford players. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay. But you can't have your white guys be Rooster. And that's really what a lot of Wisconsin's roster is, Rooster. So, yeah, I gotta tap out on that. We'll come back, Twitter poll, and your feedback of the week next. All right, this week's Twitter poll results. We asked you how many Big Ten teams make the NCAA tournament 2 weeks from now. The majority answer is how many I had in, 8. That's what 44% of you said. 26% said 9. 23% of you said 7. Only about 7.5% of you said 10. So I've got 8. Do you think I have the right number?
Yep, that's what I voted for.
Okay.
I mean, it could be 9. I don't think it could be 7.
If Michigan wins one of the 2 road games this week, it's funny, if you go on all the websites that let you play around with teams' resumes, if you flip Michigan's quad 4 loss at home to Central Michigan, they're in every bracket. So what that tells me is if Michigan were to win one of the 2 road games this week, that they close out at Illinois, at Indiana, I think they're in, okay? Because I think that cancels that out. The problem is they're getting both of those teams at a terrible time. Illinois obviously is going to want to get off the schneid, has not played well recently. Indiana is going to freaking murder us this weekend after the way they played against Iowa. All right. They're not coming out and doing that at home 2 games in a row, and it's senior day and everything else. So then I think you're asking Michigan and Wisconsin, or Penn State, which would be the 9th or 10th team. You're asking them to basically win 2 or 3 games in Chicago. And I know someone's going to win the Big Ten tournament, Aaron. Someone will. It just seems like asking anyone to win 2 or 3 games in Chicago is too much, just given how balanced the league has been this year. All right, let's get to our feedback of the week. I talked about Iowa pulling off one of the most improbable comebacks in Big Ten history, which means Michigan State just suffered one of the worst chokes in Big Ten history. Pete Levette begs to differ. He says, hey, Michigan State made 10 out of 12 from the free throw line. That wasn't a choke job. I mean, they were 31 out of 36 from the free throw line, 11 out of 15 from 3, and still lost. That was just an incredible outcome. You agree with that? Was it too hard on me for saying Sparty choked?
Point of order. A little bit, I guess. But you still lost the game one way or another. That was
they were still by 13 with 93 seconds left.
Yeah. So I don't care. But 31 for 36 from the free throw line, that's the reason you got the stare down. Usually it's the other way around. Iowa's the one with that number. So that was the anomaly, and that's, I think, Fran, I don't think he actually thought Iowa had any chance of winning. He was trying to get thrown out because I think he had a technical foul when the stare down happened. He was trying to get thrown out. But I think that's probably the main reason he was He was upset.
All right. Another year in the books. We'll find out in 2 weeks how many of these I got right, how many of these I got wrong. That'll do it for this week's episode. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, no matter how you watch, like right here on YouTube, or listen, like on iTunes and elsewhere, in order for us to be bestowed the honor we need from the all-powerful algorithm. We need your help along those regards. We also would appreciate it if you'd like or follow, so subscribe, so you could get our podcast. So again, the algorithm will be pleased. In between episodes, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Bigger10. Of course, we'll have a lot to say next week on the episode. We'll break down the Big Ten tournament bracket and make our predictions on what we think will happen in Chicago, which means we're really going to be doing a lot of that. All right. So for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next week right here on Bigger 10.